So, today our topic is about what is addiction. So, basically, addiction is a chronic brain disorders in which a person compulsively use a substances or engage in a behavior despite harmful consequences due to changes in the brain reward system. So, the brain and addictions have a special relationship with each other. For example, addiction is a brain disorder because it changes the normal working of the brain. The reward system is affected, such as addiction mainly affects the brain reward pathways. The dopamine levels are altered. For example, addictive substances release some excessive dopamines, causing the pleasures. In the main brain structures changes, such as areas controlling the decision making and self controls become weak. Tolerance development, for example, brain needs more substances to feel the same effects. In the loss of control occurs, such as the brain pushes the person to keep using the substances despite harm of them. So now we discuss some of the parts of the brain which are affected by the addiction. For example, there is the 10 parts of the brain which affect by the addiction. The first and the most important part is the prefrontal cortex. The second one is the nucleus accumbens. The third one is the amygdala. The fourth one is the hippocampus, and the fifth one is the virtual trimentals. In the same way, hypothalamus and sola basal cannula, anterior anterior cingulate cortex, and the orbital frontal cortex is also some of the parts of the brain which are affected by the addiction. So now the question is how addiction affect us. Basically, this addiction damage the reward pathway by overstimulating the dopamine. It also reduces the self-control and the decisions making. In the main way, we can create a strong cravings and dependency of such things. It also decreases the pleasures from the normal activities, affects the mental health such as the stress, anxiety, and the mood changes, also harms the physical health and the daily functions, which lead to the behavior and the social problems. So here there is some common biological link addictions which we will discuss one by one to understand the brain addiction problem. The first is the drug addiction. Basically, opiates, cocaines, and marijuana and alcohol are some of the drug addiction, and the basic mechanism behind that is it will overstimulate the dopamine in the mesolimbic pathway, which is the intense giving the intense pleasures to the body. The second pathway is the nicotine, which also called the tobacco addiction, which is basically the cigarette and the vaping. The mechanism is that the nicotine increase the dopamine which release in nucleus accumbens, and it will help to for the reinforcement. The third addiction is the alcohol addiction, which is the chronic alcohol use. The mechanism include it also enhance the dopamine and GABA signaling, which reward and cause the relaxation of the human body. So these are the type of the addictions which have been discussed and shown in this picture. So these addictions are some of the showing the alcohol symptoms, such as the common sign of drinking problems or a sign of the food addiction. So now the question is how addiction occur. Basically, there are 6 different parts which will maybe cause the addictions to be occur, and which we call the cycle of the addiction, and it depend upon the different multiple factors. For example, tolerance level, dependency, addictions, replaceables, some mental uses, and some abuses are the main causes of these addiction. So now the question is how to stay same from these type of the addiction. So there is the 8 different rules which we can help to identify our body to stay away from these addiction. For example, educate yourself. Second, build some healthy habits. Third, set some goals. Avoid some triggers. develop strong relationships, manage the stress, seek help when needed, and limit the screen time. So, addiction is also linked with some of the reward pathways. For example, the reward pathway is a system in the brain that control the pleasure, motivation, and the learning. It also helps us to repeat the behaviors and that are good or rewarding. So there are some main parts of the reward pathways. For example, ventral tegmental areas, which we call the VTA, and it produces the dopamine. So this is the first reward pathway in the brain. The second pathway is the nucleus accumbens, which receive the dopamine and responsible for the pleasures and the reward. The third one is the prefrontal cortex. It helps in the decision making and self control. The fourth one is the amygdala, which control the emotions related to the rewards. And the fifth one is the hippocampus, which store the memories of rewarding experiences. So now the question is how a reward pathway works. For example, a stimulus activates the ventral tegmental area, so the VTA release some of the dopamine, and the dopamine travel to the nucleus accumbens, which pleasure and rewards are experienced, and so the prefrontal cortex reinforce the behavior. So these reward pathway and addiction will work in three different manners. For example, first, in normal activities, dopamine is released in balanced amount. Second, in addiction during the drug, alcohol, and excessive gaming, too much dopamine is released. And the third, this damage self-control and make the person crave the substances or behavior again and again. So there is the different type of the reward system. For example, the first one is the addictive reward. For example, this can be defined as a reward that strongly compel repeat behavior, often leading to dependency or habit formation. For example, social media likes, video games, or gambling. You keep doing it because your brain crave the pleasure. So the key is that often linked to dopamine release in the brain. So the second one is the hedonic reward. For example, a reward that bring pleasure or enjoyment. For example, eating a chocolate, listening to music, or watching a favorite show. So basically the key is it focus on immediate sensory pleasures, not necessarily long-term goal. Hedonic reward is also responsible for bring pleasure or enjoyment, such we discuss about. And the third one is the incentive rewards. For example, a reward used to encourage or motivate someone to perform a specific task. For example, getting a bonus for finishing a project or a prize for winning a contest. So the key is usually external, goal oriented, and plan to shape the behavior. The fourth one is the extrinsic reward. We can define as a reward give from an external source for performing a task. For example, money, grades, promotions, and trophies are the extrinsic rewards. So the key is that it motivations come from outside yourself, not from the task itself. And the fifth one is the intrinsic reward, which can be defined as a reward that comes from within, from the satisfaction of doing the activities itself. For example, feeling proud after solving a difficult problem, enjoying the painting, or learning a new skill. So the key is that motivations come from personal fulfillment, not from the external reward. So these are all about the addiction and their relationship with the brain and the reward system. Thank you so much.